Good evening and welcome to another Our Bookshop event. It's an absolute honour to be hosting one of Elizabeth's launch events for this most remarkable book. You have a theme of having beautiful books, but I'm going to leave Harriet to discuss with that. I'm just going to give you a little bit of functional details. Audience, thank you for joining us. Please, can you use the Q&A function along the bottom of the screen? You'll see that to ask your questions. I will then be back in sort of half an hour to 40 minutes and will assist Harriet with the audience Q&A section. But without further ado, can I hand over to the wonderful Harriet Queralt?
Oh, thanks, Ben. And Elizabeth, welcome to Tring, albeit virtually. We're really big fans of you here. The Circus of Wonders is the Tring Our Bookshop Book of the Month. And I know that The Doll Factory was a real bestseller at our bookshop, as well as being on the Sunday Times bestseller list. And I think it was a Radio 2 Book of the Month and a Radio 4 Book at Bedtime as well, I think. So, you know, I bet you were blown away by such an amazing reception for The Doll Factory.
Yeah, completely. It was kind of all of my dreams exploding around me. I kind of didn't really know what to do with myself. But yeah, one of my favorite things was going around bookshops and, you know, meeting Ben in our bookshop. And that was when it was still, I think the bookshop was still relatively new. So yeah, really exciting that it's managed to hold on and hopefully come back with a vengeance.
Yeah. Well, The Circus of Wonders is your second book and literally just launched this week. And I know that lots of you watching will have received your books this week. I don't know if anyone's finished it yet. I managed to finish it very quickly. It was such a good read. But hopefully, those of you listening have received your books and you've started to have a read. But we're not going to spoil the story. We're not going to give any spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers.
And I think there's so much to talk about with the kind of context anyway. I think we'll be fine. And a bit like, you know, The Doll Factory, for those of you that have read that, that gave us such a kind of rich glimpse into Victorian culture. With, you know, the backdrop of the Great Exhibition and the pre-Raphaelites, etc. But The Circus of Wonders kind of moves to an even more kind of specific Victorian fascination, doesn't it, for the, you know, freak show or the, you know, the monsters exhibits, as they said. Why did you choose to choose the Victorian era again for your second novel, and why this specific focus of the circus?
So I actually sort of never set out with the intention of even writing historical fiction. It's kind of the settings and the stories which have gripped me, which have meant that I felt like, oh, I cannot give this up. And it was, you know, with The Doll Factory, that was the Great Exhibition and collecting and pre-Raphaelite art, and it just felt so ripe for a book about all of those themes of kind of obsession and possession and collecting. And then it was sort of almost a similar thing with Circus of Wonders. I spent, you know, after the, you know, as you were talking about the amazing accolades The Doll Factory received, I spent quite a long time kind of scrabbling around for my second idea and wondering, you know, what on earth that was going to be, because yeah, the pressure, I certainly put a lot of pressure on myself. I had to give myself a lot of pep talks to kind of just get a grip and write a book. Again, it was just, it was discovering more about this world that made me feel like this was the story I wanted to write. So in terms of the inspiration for it, I was, you know, it was six months after The Doll Factory was published, and I was sort of feeling the pressure to have delivered something, you know, really quite soon. And I didn't have an idea, and what I was working on didn't really work. And then I was flicking through this book of Victorian photography, and I came across this very small carte de visite, which is sort of a small photograph of this bearded woman. And she was holding a book and staring straight at the camera. And underneath it, it said, "Unidentified bearded woman, aged 23." And her name had been smudged. So she didn't even have a name. And from there, she just lodged in my mind, and I kind of couldn't forget her. And as with so many things, it's kind of that fragment that excited me. And yeah, from then I started to research the world that she might have been a part of. And I couldn't give it up. I felt like this was a fascinating piece of history that deserved to be written about, in terms of its nuance, like, because I mean, there's The Greatest Showman, but anyway, that was, which kind of is more about the empowerment and glamorizing it, whereas of course the reality was quite different.
Yeah, I mean, I learned an awful lot about about the backgrounds, and you mention a lot of sort of actual, historical figures from the circus in your novel, but interestingly, all the main characters are fictional, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
It was really fascinating to read a bit more about the kind of real figures at the end of your book. Can you tell, there were just some amazing and also very sad stories of the way that they were treated. Can you tell us a bit about the real, historical figures that you found out about?
Yeah, so beforehand, and I've had an enduring interest in Victorian society and fiction, and yet I realised that I actually knew very little about the freak industry, and I call it the freak industry. I know it's a loaded term, but it's the accurate term. And yeah, it had kind of, and then I realised that it was this enormous commercial enterprise. Before, I'd kind of thought like maybe it was maybe an American concern with P.T. Barnum, but it was a massive booming commercial enterprise within the UK, where it just proliferated. It was just through all levels of society, where even Queen Victoria, she was known as the freak fancier, and she was obsessed with the freak show, and she had people with dwarfism, with albinism, with microcephaly, with vitiligo. She had them all to Buckingham Palace to meet them, and she became one of its biggest fans. And that was something which has kind of been forgotten about and hushed up because it's sort of seen as quite distasteful now, or quite the lives of the people involved were so harrowing that everyone sort of has forgotten that it was such an enormous British thing. But I could give I could talk about so many of the people who were involved in it, whether that was Charles Stratton, who some people, if they've seen The Greatest Showman, which it's a musical about a real showman called P.T. Barnum, and in the musical, Charles Stratton is like this 23-year-old who's like, oh, I'm really unhappy in my life, like P.T. Barnum, like show me this big wide world and I'll happily come along with you. Just need a bit of coaxing, but I'll get there. Whereas in reality, Charles Stratton was 4 years old when his parents sold him to P.T. Barnum. And I think his life is a particularly interesting one because it kind of straddles both the empowerment and also the exploitation which you find in that world. So on the one hand, he was basically a very, very young child celebrity who the showman P.T. Barnum kind of just puffed up and made him world famous. He was an international celebrity, where a restaurant in Paris changed its name after him to Le Tom Pouce. He was the face of cigar boxes. He was, he traveled the world. He made so much money. He had his own yacht. He had a mansion with a stable of pedigree horses, and he was very happily and with great fanfare married to another person with dwarfism called Lavinia Warren. And so his was a life which was massive, but it began in this uneasy way. And so too were and another example. I'll give one other example, because I know I'm talking at length, so P.T. Barnum, which another fact which is curiously omitted from the feel-good musical, was the fact that he made his money through buying an ex-slave called Joyce Heth, who was around 80 years old, but he marketed her as the oldest woman in the world, where he claimed that she was 160 years old and had been the nurse to George Washington. So anyway, he toured. He had her teeth pulled out so she looked older, and he toured her old semi-paralyzed all over North America. And then when she died, he held a public autopsy to prove her age, where he charged spectators a fee to attend it. And I mean, that is one of the most harrowing examples of exploitation, and, you know, extremely distressing. And a lot of the research I did was distressing, and there were times when it was a difficult book to write for those reasons, as well as many other reasons. But yeah,
and I think that's why you made the decision to invent your characters rather than use any of them, because you felt that they'd been exploited enough and you wanted to kind of leave them.
Completely, you know, because the whole showman spiel was about spinning stories around the acts which the showman had. So, you know, someone was hatched from an egg, or someone, you know, or someone with ectrodactyly was, which is where your fingers are fused together. They were known as lobster people, and they were, you know, they were like that because their mother had fainted at an exceptionally large catch of the day when they were pregnant with the child, and so there were just all of these. It was just kind of this, this sort of melting pot of stories being spun about these people, and these people being voiceless. And I felt like by sort of using a real life figure, like if I'd written about Joyce Heth or Charles Stretton, then I felt like I'd have just been sort of perpetuating the same thing. I'd just have been, in fictionalizing them, I'd have been imagining the grey areas of their lives, and I felt uncomfortable doing that. Ooh, have I frozen, or have you?
Yeah, but I think, you know, you really show that through the characters you do. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. You were a little bit stuttery, but I can hear you.
I think you show that that on the one hand, you know, these characters were given big opportunities, but you also show a little bit about the story, obviously without spoiling it, but also maybe introduce some of the characters to us.
Yeah, sure. I think I got all of that question. So you wanted me to tell you a little bit about the story and introduce you to the characters.
Great.
Yes, and if it's me that's cracking up, someone just let me know on the little panel thing, because it might be me or it might be you. I don't know.
I can hear you.
If it's me going, then. Yes. So in terms of the story itself, it's a novel about power and ownership and fame and the threat of invisibility. And the problems that Harriet ends. That's not mine. At least that's a small consolation, because my internet here isn't great.
Sorry.
Anyway, sorry to Harriet. I don't mean to be like, oh, it's all your fault. But anyways, so at the center of the story there is Nell, and she is a girl who is speckled with birthmarks, and she's sold in one of the very early scenes. It was not a spoiler. She's sold by her father to Jasper Jupiter, who's a traveling showman, and then she finds herself catapulted into this world of fame and money, where, you know, figurines are cast in her image, crowds rush to watch her soar, and newspapers scribble stories about her. But then it's what happens when her fame threatens to eclipse that of the showman who bought her. So hopefully that gives a brief summary into Nell, into Jasper, and the story itself.
Yeah. I found another aspect really interesting, which is another setting that you sort of flash back to, which is the Crimean War. And it's something I don't know anything about at all. And I found that really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about why because it adds a lot to the story. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to add that, and also kind of your research into it as well?
Yeah, of course. So I actually thought I was going to write a book about the Crimean War, a novel about the Crimean War, before I started writing Circus of Wonders. So I'd done a lot of research. I'd done, a month's, well, not a lot, I'd done a month's worth of research. But, in my head, I thought, okay, this isn't relevant. This is gone. That's fine. I had an interesting month. And then when I started writing Circus of Wonders, I suddenly started to make parallels between the circus and the military spectacle of war, whether that's like kind of any war, like, I don't know, when I think of the military now, I think of kind of, as well as kind of the obviously harrowing death bit and killing bit of war, I also think of kind of the parades, the brass bands, the spangled uniforms, and how there is so much kind of show about war. So I sort of, on the one hand, I thought that, but then the Crimean War in particular just seemed so perfectly suited as a parallel. It's a fascinating war, actually. So it was a war of real mythology where, you know, you've got Florence Nightingale, who's the lady with the lamp, you know, that's the enduring image of it. But because of because of new inventions in technology, it was also a war of real propaganda, where, you know, it was the first time where there were frontline reporters. There was William Howard Russell, and he would send reports back to London, which painted the war in a particularly negative light. And then there was the effort to kind of contradict that by means like photography, for example, which was a new invention. And the character Toby is out there. Sorry, Toby is Jasper's brother who kind of lives in his shadow. And Toby is tasked with taking photographs of the Crimean War, but staging them so that they looked kind of like palatable. It looked like everyone had the right kit and the tents were neatly arranged, and there were none of these harrowing scenes which William Howard Russell was writing about. So yeah, so that kind of propaganda and truth versus lies felt so suited to the circus, where so much of it is about, you know, illusion and reality and tricks and hoaxes. And at what point does, you know, Toby's storytelling with his photographs become something unsettling, and at what point does Jasper's storytelling around Nell become something she is uncomfortable with, where she wants to tell her own story? So yeah, I think that was where it all came from. And then it was a piece which a piece of history which I really enjoyed researching about, especially as before then I'd never really had a particular interest in military history.
Well, I didn't know anything about the Crimean War. And what I thought was, you know, these women that would go and sort of set up the elaborate tents and sort of watch.
Yes, so
did that really happen?
Yeah, so that's another part of it which was very paralleled with the circus. You know, tourists would come out and they would watch the war, they would spectate, they would go out on their steamers, you know, and at one of the battles, I think it was the Battle of Balaclava, there was even, you know, that once the British kind of gained territory, they found, you know, abandoned petticoats, a half-eaten chicken, some opera glasses, because a group of women were so convinced, you know, that the war would be won, that they sat there and watched it and had a picnic. And at Cathcart's Hill, which was a hill overlooking the battlefields, there'd be hundreds of spectators, and lots of them were kind of high society women. There were also lots of women there at the Crimean, which I didn't really realize whether they, you know, there were nurses under Florence Nightingale, but there were also lots of camp followers too. And there was sort of a hat with pebbles, and there were 6 black pebbles for every 100, and all of the soldiers' wives were able to draw a pebble out of the hat, and if they received a black one, they were able to join the men on the march. So it was an incredibly interesting piece, especially given, you know, my interest in women and their place in a patriarchal society, to realize that there were so many women present at the war. And Stella, who is one of my favorite characters, she's a bearded woman and she befriends Nell, but she was present at the Crimean War, and she kind of put on these shows like so many of the women there did.
Mm. And like you said, such an interesting parallel with the circus, you know.
Yeah, spectating and
yeah,
and
really.
spectating on something uncomfortable as well, or that we might see as uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I loved the idea about the, you know, kind of Victorian fake news of, you know, Toby trying to take the realistic photos and not being allowed to, and you know, the propaganda, etc. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of parallel, and yeah, it does.
And a contemporary one too, because, you know, fake news is, you know, we think of it as so contemporary, you know, that images now are being manipulated, and, you know, that this has been going on for so long, and really that era was the time where it was able to explode, because the rise of technology meant that all of these jostling opinions and images could kind of contradict each other and tell different stories.
And like the I can't remember the term for it, but the little photo cards that the
carte de visite.
Yes, really fascinating as well. And you know, something else I didn't know about, but you know, that's the interesting photography link as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something else I was really interested in were the kind of texts lurking beneath the surface. So, you know, references to things like Frankenstein and, you know, fairy tales, The Little Mermaid, the myth of Icarus. Can you tell us a bit about your decisions there?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if my first draft contained many of those, but first of all, I think that, so Jasper in particular, he's very well versed in Frankenstein, and he reads it in a particularly deluded and biased way. Same with Icarus, he kind of forgets that you know, Icarus has a fall. He sees it as, you know, that he should always be striving for more, always being ambitious. I think at one point he says, you know, better to try and fly than stay trapped in that tower. And so I feel like Jasper was he's a very ambitious person, and he also sees echoes of himself through lots of fictional creators, I suppose. So he always sees himself either as part of a great literary history, or as the creator where he's holding the pen. So I felt like it was very fitting for him to kind of look at himself in relation to this kind of greater narrative. But it really, those kind of ideas around fairy tales and storytelling, they came about because of, you know, of course, as an able-bodied person, I was very conscious that I was writing about an incredibly important part of disability history. And I thought, you know, and I really questioned whether I could or should write this book. And then that was where the book became a book about storytelling and a book about appropriation, where I kind of wanted to put lots of those questions into the book itself, where, you know, Nell looks at these fairy tales, and at the beginning she's kind of uncomfortable with them. You know, these narratives about, you know, girls having their tails chopped off so that they become normal, or Beauty and the Beast, where Beast is transformed by love into this perfect human. And there are plenty of other examples of kind of this kind of thing. And there's, as a side note, there's an amazing book called Amanda Leduc, who has cerebral palsy, called Disfigured, and that is all about her own experience growing up with damaging narratives like fairy tales, Disney, Hook, you know, The Lion King and Scar, you know, and how that made her feel, and how important it is to tell different stories. But anyway, so that's side note. But yeah, so Nell, really, part of her journey is about her realizing that those stories do make her uncomfortable, and wanting to tell a different story, I suppose. So, you know, it's not a spoiler, but, you know, towards the end of the book, she starts to make up her own stories, which tell a different narrative, where, you know, someone with a disability is not to be pitied or mocked or feared, which, you know, even in our, you know, it's really, my eyes have been so open to how many negative stereotypes are perpetuated now against people with disabilities through books and films and TV, and really just how extremely damaging that is and continues to be.
But your book, I think, you know, really makes us aware of that. And, you know, that scene very near the beginning when Nell is really sort of taunted by her whole village and is seen as an outcast. And although, you know, she might be forced into the circus, actually, you know, she really makes amazing friends, and, you know, it's actually a very supportive environment. And there's that just brilliant friendship, isn't there, between that group, which is so positive. And the ending as well, which I won't talk about.
No endings.
Something else I was going to ask you about, as well as being a really talented writer, you're also an amazing potter. So you make some absolutely wonderful ceramics. And I think, am I right that you've made some ceramics to sort of reflect the theme and perhaps to reflect different characters?
Yeah.
Have you got some pieces there?
I mean, we did talk about this earlier. I don't want to be like, and here's one I made earlier. So yeah, I will do my little show and tell of my ceramics. So yeah, I was kind of just, it's really because I've, you know, pre-publication nerves have been quite intense, and pottery is my way of relaxing. And I thought, you know, what would be a lovely thing is if I made myself a little tea set, which kind of represents Circus of Wonders. So I do have it here for you. So I feel so like I'm a little child showing off my work.
No, I really want to see.
So here's a teacup, and it's a moon for Nellie Moon, because when Nell becomes famous, she is known. Her celebrity name is Nellie Moon, because she's the queen of the moon and stars. And then inside there's a little sea lion. So when you drink your tea, you'll be able to see his head bobbing up. So I also feel like I'm one of those, you know, the people at the bottom of the TV who's trying to like sell things like 2 sold, 4 sold. They're not for sale, so that's fine. I'm not just being ridiculous. And this is
a quick message from Kate actually saying, "Is the mug for sale?"
Oh right, it isn't now, but maybe I'll make some for sale once I've had my baby, because that's going to be taking up my time away from pottery. But here is Jasper Jupiter's top hat, which is a sugar bowl, and he's also got a whip spoon, which is so fragile I daren't pick it up. But and just because the extremely extra lion and lioness candlesticks, to the little hint of the menagerie. So yeah. I was, because the Victorian menageries were absolutely huge. You know, they'd be, you know, sea lions would be caught off Alaska and transported back, and you know, under the Thames there were lots of vaults where lots of animals from, you know, voyages to Africa and India would come back and then sell them to showmen. It was, and they were often extremely badly treated. So wait,
Camilla's asking where's
Minnie's coming. I've just got to pick Minnie up with both hands.
This is the teapot, I think.
Yeah, so Minnie is the elephant.
Oh my lord.
Oh,
I know. It also weighs a ton. I'm not sure if it will actually survive the kiln without cracking. But there she is.
Do you have your own kiln?
Yeah, I do. Although it's not as sort of a like big thing as people seem to think kilns are. It just plugs into a normal socket, so it's not that high tech. And finally, I hope I'm
It's such an obvious idea to use an elephant to use the nose as but anyway.
Thank you. And here is my cake stand, and these are going to be zebras when I colour them in. And see those little hooks underneath the moon? I'm just
What
so
hangs there?
So is that the trapeze?
Yes. So here is Nellie.
Oh.
So she's going to swing underneath it. You can see she's got a couple of like little hooks on her as well. So,
and in the novel as well, one of the things that Jasper, the showman, does is he has little figurines made of Nellie, doesn't he?
Exactly. Yeah.
Did that actually happen in Victorian Circus?
It did. Wedgwood in particular, their factory used to churn out so many little ceramic figurines of anyone who was remotely famous. And again, it was kind of that was the time where fame could really proliferate, where you could have your very own Florence Nightingale sitting on your mantelpiece, or Queen Victoria, you know, where it was just, the time was absolutely ripe for that kind of, that for celebrity and its real explosion.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because we think that's something that's quite 21st century, but you know, there's a lot of parallels, and I just, it quite amazed me how, and you know, the Queen Victoria thing, and she had her own gallery, didn't she?
Yeah.
You know, it's quite modern, really. Very interesting. Oh, thank you so much for showing the pottery. People in the comments really appreciated that.
You're gonna need to. You're telling me you've not fired them yet, though. So
no, I haven't fired them, so they're still very fragile.
that sounds like I mean, is that the scariest moment of any potter's life, the firing process?
Yeah, it's also partly why I photographed them before they were fired. Yeah, I just have to hope that the kiln gods are on my side, because there have been disasters in the past, and no one wants an exploding teapot.
No. But for those who are interested, I know Elizabeth's pottery is for some other pottery is for sale on your website, isn't it? So
well, when I do my next shop update, which might not be until January, but I'm hoping, like, I've just got this very naive idea about how easy having a child is going to be. I'll be like, yeah, he'll sleep when I just, you know, a couple of days old, and I'll just throw some pots, and it will.
When's the baby due?
Mid-July.
Oh, good luck with that.
Yeah, frantically trying to sand my floors.
I remember doing exactly the same thing when I was pregnant. Yeah, it's a nesting urge.
Yeah, moving house into a place which needs renovation. Anyway, I'm off topic.
I have one more question for you. Again, from your website, I noticed that you give a bursary to a creative writing student. Is it at the University of East Anglia, which has that very famous creative writing course? Were you there, or do you just feel the need to support emerging writers? You know, what was it like for you in that period, and how easy was it for you to get into the publishing world?
So I mean, I guess I'll start with, yes, I was there. And how easy was it to get into the publishing world? Hard, very hard. You know, because you know, you need to be producing really, really good work. And for my first 8 years of writing, you know, when I left university, I was determined to make it as a writer. So I'd get up every morning at 5 in the morning, and I'd write before I went to work. And of course, like my early days with pottery, where I was creating these hideously deformed vessels, which, you know, had to go in the bin. It was the same with my books. I wrote 2 books then, which were kind of like my early experiments that didn't work. And they were turned down by publishers. And then after the second rejection, I thought, you know, I need to learn more. I need to understand more about how to put a book together. And that was when I decided to apply to University of East Anglia. And I was given a scholarship, which made a huge difference to me. And it was a phenomenal year. It gave me the confidence to write the book I wanted to write. I made so many mistakes, and that was the point of the course. And I learned from them. And it was just, I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote through that year. And then towards the end, I started writing The Doll Factory. And so then I suppose getting into the publishing world happened faster than anything I could ever have expected or dreamed of. But yeah, there were those quiet years behind it. And when I got that publishing deal, only something like 6 months after leaving UEA, I thought, you know, that scholarship has done so much for me. The aim of the person bestowing it was for me then to be able to make use of it and to become a published writer. And I thought, you know, I needed to do the same. I needed to pay it forward, really. So since then, I've given that bursary back to people.
Amazing. Oh, well, I think that's all my questions, but I think there's lots of others.
We've got loads coming in. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Keep them coming. There was a load of comments actually before, right at the start, which I'd skirted round. But actually, let's start with Margaret put a comment about congratulations on the exquisite book. It's too beautiful to put on the bookshelf, which is, I mean, there you go. That should go on the front cover.
Oh, no, that's the proof. That's the proof. Don't worry, the gold foiling doesn't come off the real one. The gold foiling, you can't scratch it off, I promise.
I mean, I have to say the design of Doll Factory was exquisite, and there was a whole bell jar thing that it actually inspired us to dig out a bell jar that we had and put it in the shop, and we put.
I love that.
Remember that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, the book's entrapment.
Exactly. So I'm going to. I'll obviously the this is going to go in the bell jar as well. So
Hooray.
Hooray, hooray, hooray.
Or it could swing from a trapeze.
Well, that might be a bit harder to set up, frankly. But we'll, I'm always up for a challenge. I mean, obviously, the design style that Pam Macmillan have given you is exquisite. I mean, there's a lot of great book design going on at the moment, but you have to say, it's almost like a job done, really, for the design award for this year's book cover. It's at what point did you see the cover in the process?
Pretty much when it was finished. I mean, I'm so fortunate to have such a brilliant cover designer. She's called Katie Took, and she's designed both of my covers. She designed the miniaturist book cover as well, if you remember that, because that's another absolute cracker. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know the first thing about book design, and to write a book, which for me just kind of, even now I still kind of see it as a Word document on my laptop. And then for her to kind of reimagine it and create just this exquisite cover, you know, where, and also just so inviting, like even just the stripes pulling you in, and Nell on her trapeze, and all of these kind of representing, well, you'll find out later in the book what they represent. But yeah, it was just an absolutely surreal moment where I saw it first of all, and I was like, of course, that's my book. That is just even more beautiful than anything I could ever have imagined. So yeah, I am really lucky to have this cover. Was there a follow-up question? I can't remember, or
not really. I just I think the designer who I missed her name when you
Katie Took.
Katie Took.
Yeah.
I think I mean, clearly she's got a wonderful design style, but when she saw Circus of Wonders and read, I imagine she got very excited. I think because it's so evocative and so visual and so kind of, and frankly, she smashed it out the park. So Camilla, Camilla, your agent publicist who's watching it, you can be highly commended for it. It's fantastic. However, that's not for me to ask questions. It's for the audience. So let me start with Hayley. Could you give us an insight into the writing process? How did writing this book compare with the first, which I think is a great question, because obviously the first one, I suspect the process of, your first one and then having to do it again must be no pressure for the very much harder job for the second time.
Yeah, the first one as well kind of reflected a decade's worth of interests. I've shown off my pots. I'm interested in art. I love making things. I love objects. I love kind of clutter and creating. I've even written a dissertation at university on clutter in Victorian literature, which was about the pre-Raphaelites and the Great Exhibition. So I had all of these interests, which really I just needed to get down on the page and string into a story. So that was it was even I collected China dolls as a child, a creepy habit which I probably shouldn't talk about. But so that was really the Doll Factory, and I wrote it with no pressure at all, and just with sheer joy and no expectations. And then all of a sudden, it sort of ended up, being published in a way that I never could have dreamed of. And I found myself sort of thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to write another book. What? Oh no, what am I interested in? And it took me a while actually to, as I mentioned before, to kind of come to Circus of Wonders with the carte de visite of the bearded woman and everything there. And certainly I have no athletic prowess. So writing about physicality was something I had to learn a lot about, and I had to do so much research for this book, a lot more actually than I did for the Doll Factory. As well as the fact that I wanted to, I did so much research into what it's like to live with a disfigurement or a disability, which was something I was keener than any other part of the book to get as right as I could and to do justice to. But yeah, writing it was at times really difficult, and I had to stop myself comparing a very rough first draft with a very polished Doll Factory, which had gone through so many rounds of edits. But yeah, I also wrote most of it and edited most of it in lockdown, which in a way I think was helpful in a strange way, because it's kind of a world about spectacle and friendship and physicality and touch, and crowds and everyone gathering together, and Nell kind of discovering what it means to kind of even just be touched and loved and appreciated. And it was all the things I was missing. I was missing my friends, I was missing crowds, I was missing gatherings, I was missing spectacles. And so I could kind of write about all of these things in, I suppose, the wistful and surprised way that Nell, that Nell feels when she first encounters them.
Yes. The issue of disabilities crops up in a couple of questions, which maybe I'll come back to in a bit. Kate, hopefully this is not a spoiler. Hi Elizabeth, I want to ask you about Toby and the way in which he changes and how he is perceived afterwards. That the fame is not for all. Hopefully, is that not too much of a spoiler?
So what I wonder, what the question would be, how. I suppose yes. I'm so struggling to answer this without spoiling anything.
Yeah,
but,
let's move on to another.
I also know Kate. She's lovely. She did an event for me at her library down in southwest London in Wandsworth. So I can DM Kate and we can chat about it.
Kate, we're gonna leave that question. Tell you what, Kate. Well, we're obviously this is our book of the month. So Elizabeth is going to be coming to our book club thing, which I think is on the 7th of June. So Monday, it's the first Monday of June, and so we have half an hour of chat, and then Elizabeth joins us to get the questions from the half an hour chat. It's
tell me everything you hate.
Honestly, it's an absolute joy doing this, and thank you so much for agreeing to do it. I'm not even sure Camilla knows about that, but thank you anyway. Jade, you clearly have an incredible imagination. Where do you find inspiration when coming up for ideas for your new novels?
I am a bit of a magpie. I suppose the things which interest me are the fragments, little bits and pieces, little snippets here and there, that I kind of just seize onto. And it's always so difficult to trace inspiration because it's usually so many different things which in my head just all come together, but in a way that I can never actually pinpoint the moment or how. But certainly my next novel, which I'm writing at the moment. Well, no, I'm not writing it at the moment, but I will be writing it. And
not right now. Yeah.
Not right now.
But that would be impressive, I have to say.
Can't see my fingers typing away. It's set in it's about the construction of a Victorian cemetery. Because that was when the Victorian cemeteries kind of exploded, like I suppose Circus exploded then, and literally in some cases. And again, that was kind of just walking past Highgate and thinking about its history, and I suppose just always looking for stories in places I go and imagining what it would have felt like to walk down a street or experience a particular thing.
I suspect Kate is getting very excited about the cover design, because that sounds incredibly evocative as well.
I was thinking that today. I guess you don't want to go too morbid because the topic's morbid enough, isn't it? But who knows?
Yeah. There was a TV documentary on the BBC called The Biggest Dig, all about digging up Euston. It's obviously an HS2 thing, but it was. But they're digging up all these Victorian graves, and it's just extraordinary. I wonder whether that was perhaps a part of where you got the idea from. I don't know.
No, but I have to watch it. I hadn't heard of it.
It's good. It'll be on iPlayer. It's called The Biggest Dig, and it's a three-part thing. And you must watch that, because it delves into the stories of the people they're digging up, and there's obviously crypts and stuff and all sorts. So it's brilliant. Now, Lizzie, the last question actually was also Lizzie's question. So I'm going to give Lizzie the next question. Lizzie's handy. Elizabeth, what made you decide to become an author? I've only just discovered you, so really looking forward to reading Circus of Wonders. I suspect you should read Dog Factory as well. If not first or second, does it matter?
Bookshop. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Although, of course, at the moment I've got Circus of Wonders on the brain, so I'm like, well, of course, Circus of Wonders.
So have you? I mean, her question really is: have you always wanted to be an author? Was it deep in your DNA from the start?
Yeah, it was. And like, I think lots of children want to be authors, right? Because it's a career that they can identify. Like you'd probably be quite worried if a 5-year-old wanted to be a management consultant or something like that. So, you know, and yeah, my parents took me to lots of libraries when I was younger, and I loved that books meant that I could escape to a different world, a different century, a different country. And I then realized that I too could kind of create that escape, really at the beginning just for myself. And so I used to write so many stories, just sat in my room, kind of hiding from my 3 unruly siblings. And it was sort of that world expanding moment where it's just so exciting, and you've just made someone up, you've just plucked them from thin air, you've plucked a setting that you know nothing about from thin air, and you can craft a whole narrative around it. And I found that so exciting, and I never really grew out of that. At university I took it a lot more seriously, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and I still find that same childish sense of excitement when I have an idea for a book and I just can't wait to get it down. And it was the same with Circus of Wonders. I could picture part 1, which is, again, it's not a spoiler because it's in the blurb, but where Nell is sold by her father to Jasper Jupiter. I could picture that instantly. And I knew that there was a point where she would spy on the circus when she wasn't supposed to go there. I knew there was a point where she would be at a dance and she would be taken away from that. And it would kind of be like her being pulled from that village atmosphere, which, you know, she's always felt on the edge of. And I could just see it. And I just really, I wrote part 1. I wrote part 1, which actually was only from Nell's perspective at the beginning. I wrote that within a week. But then, of course, I realized that I needed more perspectives, and it took a while for me to work out how to introduce Jasper and Toby.
Yes, no, lovely answer. The that realization as a child that actually you can be paid or earn money for writing, for writing is something that during lockdown we've been hosting authors into doing streamed events into schools. And honestly, it's such a joy to see the authors describing the process of being a writer, and children from as young as, you know, year 2 or 3, suddenly realizing actually I can start making stuff up for a living. What a wonderful thing that is. Right, another question. Alice, can you recommend any books which you read as part of your research?
Yes, I can. I already mentioned Amanda Leduc's. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her surname. I should check. It's Leduc. Her book Disfigured, which is, I think everyone should read that book. It sounds like it might be, you know, it's not at all dry. It's incredibly engaging. It's incredibly powerful. It will make you reevaluate everything in you know that you know and you've experienced. I think another book, if you wanted a non-fiction book about the freak industry, is The Wonders by John Wolfe. That was a real starting point for me, and it's again a really compelling, interesting narrative, and it begins with Charles Stratton, who is Tom Thumb, appearing at Buckingham Palace and meeting the Queen for the first time and fighting a duel with one of her dogs, her spaniels, which happened. It's non-fiction. So yes, one of those two.
I did. I'm going to give a shout out for another book, actually, The Smallest Man, which was.
I haven't read that.
Fran Quid. Have you read that? It's
no.
It's historical fiction based on a dwarf. I'll call him a dwarf because that's how he's referred to. Who became advisor to Queen Mary, who was the wife of Charles I. He was the one beheaded by Cromwell, essentially. So, and she was French, and it's an extraordinary story of him evading joining a circus and being sucked into the royal household and becoming advisor to. And it's a true story. The real guy's name was Geoffrey Hudson, and there are paintings by Van Dyck of him. You know, it's an extraordinary. Wow. Let's have a look. Anonymous attendee, please can you tell us something about your writing process? So are you very much a formal kind of 9 to 5? Very.
Yeah, I'm the most boring writer there is. That's one of the biggest disappointments of being a writer. I sort of thought I get to wear fancy clothes and kind of flounce around the town, sort of just getting inspiration. But really, my life actually resembles that of an accountant, where I spend all of my day just sitting at my desk and hoping that the words will come, and beating myself up if they don't, and rejoicing if they do. So yeah, I also plot obsessively. I have an Excel spreadsheet which, with each draft, goes into more and more detail of, you know, where each kind of thread should be pulled, tightened, you know, all of those things where, you know, at the beginning I map it out chapter by chapter, and that changes a lot of the time. That changes drastically as I write, but I need to have that kind of a roadmap, I guess, for where I'm going. Otherwise, my writing just becomes very waffly.
I find it a mystery how different writers work in such different ways.
Different ways.
The most remarkable one, let me tell you this, I was interviewing Anne Cleves, and I asked her the same question: what's your writing process? She doesn't plan anything. She sits in front of a blank sheet of paper, starts writing, and so the story is revealed to her at the same time it is the reader. You know,
oh my goodness!
Can you imagine? Look at the success Anne Cleves has had. I mean, that's
yeah,
extraordinary thing. But good. Right, let's have a look at Kate. Let's trust Kate with another question. Let's see if it's not a spoiler. It was interesting that Nellie was reinvented in a positive way by Jasper, in a way that was not the case for so many people.
Yeah, although I do wonder if she was reinvented in a positive way by Jasper. You know, I think that Jasper's way of reinventing her was actually quite a common way of reinventing someone. You know, that she, you know, she pulled the moon across the sky. It was a fanciful kind of reimagining, and sure, I guess it doesn't cast her in a negative light, but it definitely takes her story away from her. And there is a point where she feels that her own history has kind of been stifled and cut off from her, and she questions who she is because she has become this fantasy figure, essentially. So whether or not I suppose it was a positive reinvention, but is any reinvention positive for her? Is the question. But
yeah, no, absolutely. Miranda, one of our team, what was your favourite chapter to write? I suspect your last one, surely, when you finished it, or was there a particular meaty one?
Actually, I did love writing the last chapter. I did, because the final part, which of course will remain completely silent around its content. But
until a book club meeting, then it's spoilers all round.
Spoilers all around. But yeah, I wrote the ending, actually, despite the fact up until that point I have to write and edit chronologically. I can never skip ahead. I wrote the ending when I was about 2/3 of the way through the book, maybe even halfway through the book, because my agent was reading what I'd written so far, and I was so terrified of the thought that she had it there. But of course, you know, I always have to be productive, so I had to be writing. But I didn't feel like I could keep writing something she was reading in case she said, "Oh, put it in the bin, trash it." So yeah, I wrote the ending, and I really enjoyed writing the ending and kind of skipping ahead and seeing the characters further on from where I had left them in my agent's very capable hands.
Yes, I can imagine. Jane Smale, so lovely to see the pottery and hear about the book, which I'm very excited to have received today. She's starting after this call. Is this a call? This is we'll call it a call, shall we? I'd love to know about Elizabeth's life before Doll Factory Publishing. Were you working? Are you still working?
I was working. I don't know how I'd have survived those 8 years of failed novels without having worked. But I was
asking if were you a full-time potter, which I think.
Oh, sorry. No, I was not. In fact, pottery was a complete accident, and writing was by dogged intention. And yeah, so before that, actually, my first job out of university was I worked for a very commercial PR agency, which is quite interesting for writing Circus of Wonders, because it got me kind of interested in the manufacturing of fame. And, you know, P.T. Barnum and lots of showmen like him they really kind of invented well, they didn't invent it, but they kind of made the PR. My cats are meowing their heads off. I'm really sorry. I hope you
can't hear it.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so he was sort of the forefather of the PR stunt, where, you know, he tried to buy Shakespeare's house and have it transported brick by brick to the US. You know, he did all sorts of, you know, things like that, where, you know, even just that he'd row down the Thames opposite a leopard or something like that, just to get people talking and to get the newspapers writing about him. But in this job in PR, you know, they were trying to do a similar thing, actually, you know, 140 years later or something, where a hotel chain to tie in with the Queen's Golden Jubilee, I, as a sort of this poor unpaid intern, had to phone up a guy who worked in graffiti art, asking if he'd spray paint 50 corgis for us, just for a photo that they hoped would, you know, make it into something like the Mail, and then the hotel would be name checked. And, you know, another company that's a cinema chain wanted to turn the trees outside the cinema into giant candy floss, so I had to ask a candy floss operator if he would do the trees. So which was, I mean, I moved on fairly quickly from that job, but and then I became a management consultant and sold my soul, but only because it was so different from writing, that I needed a balance. So I hope that rambling on.
No, absolutely. I mean, there are a few questions left. I'm conscious we've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm.
Oh gosh, sorry.
I know. Are we? I mean, how time has flown. It's extraordinary. Let's. Anonymous, that's all about writer's block. I don't think we should finish with writer's block. Catherine, let's trust you with Catherine Reardon. Your books are so immersive and full of historical detail. Typical, how long do you spend on the research part of the work, and how long and how do you stop yourself from falling down various rabbit holes and know that you have enough background into what when you start writing?
I try and do the absolute bare minimum research before I start writing. I need to have enough to be able to write about the world that I'm going to go into, and that's it. Otherwise, I find that the story gets lost. And, you know, I'm writing a novel. I'm writing to entertain a reader, to keep them turning the pages. And so that's what I did with Circus of Wonders. In a way, it was much harder than The Doll Factory, because my knowledge was so much more scant about this world. So it meant that I really had to kind of cut lots of ideas, like, oh, there are so many shiny things, so many things that I want to show off, so many things that I want to have happen. But I had to kind of cut through them and do as little as I could, and then write the first draft. But as I write, I tend to fill in the blanks as I go. And then when I finish the first draft, that is when I do a massive research binge. So, you know, I live in fear of getting it wrong, because I feel like it's really important, particularly when I'm writing about a world which involved real people and real people's lives. I feel a real responsibility to get it right. So that's when I basically lock myself in the British Library or in my room with a tower of books sort of as tall as I am, and then I find loads of nuggets which are so interesting and which I can kind of slip in, or I realize I've got something wrong, or I think like, oh, hang on, that could tie in with the plot which I've written, rather than kind of steering the plot around things that I have read, if that makes sense.
And you've now got your pile of sort of cemetery related material, which is now growing.
Yes, I need to get on that.
Yeah. Good. Listen, all good things come to an end. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday night. It's an absolute pleasure to be hosting. Harriet, thank you once again for helping out with this. A shout out to Camilla for assisting in making this happen. Thank you to the audience as well. Now, I've just put a little link. If you want to grab that, it's a link to our YouTube channel where you can catch this event will be listed there. In the next couple of days. You'll also find, dare I say it, the Fran Quinn interview regarding The Smallest Man, which was a pleasure. That was recorded back in January, I think it was. But Elizabeth, thank you so much. What next?
No, thank you. Thanks for organising it. Thanks for inviting me. You know, it's been a delightful Saturday evening.
Oh, lovely. And you got anything else planned this evening? Just sit down with in fact, you're pregnant, obviously, so no gin then.
No gin. I haven't been able to toast or celebrate this launch at all. But
well, tell you what.
No,
Once
I've eaten lots. Food has been my way.
And the end of July, August, come and visit Tring, and we can toast. We can toast then.
I would love nothing more.
Brilliant.
Great, and thank you, Harriet, as well for your questions.
Oh, thank you. It's so lovely to meet you.
Fantastic. Everyone have a great evening, and
have a great one.
See you very soon.